Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. We have a Facebook page called The Writer's Dream. If you have any questions or you would like to send us any messages, please do so on the Facebook page. We are also on YouTube, The Writer's Dream. So today our guest is Donald E. Allen, and Donald E. Allen is an author and a poet. He is a prize-winning poet. He is the author of April 1861, which is a rendering of a year in American history that was extremely painful, done in poetry for 30 days. And he is the winner of the National Poetry Month Writing Contest. He also appears, he's included in the Bard Annuals 2013, 14, and 15. Mm-hmm. And he started his career in a little bit of a weird way, didn't you?
Well, which weird way is that?
Well, whichever weird way you would like to tell me about. Because like me, I believe you came to your writing career later in life.
I did. After 38 years in aerospace here on Long Island, I was shown the door.
Yeah.
And I had to decide, what am I going to do next? And I said, well, you know, I've been doing tech writing for the past 10 years, and I've always liked to tell stories. Let me see if I can blend the two of them. So my wife saw an ad for a creative writing class at the local library. So she sent me off to that, and I enjoyed it. And my instructor, my facilitator, saw something in it and said, hey, you know, you should really pursue this. So I did with one of my stories. And then one day she came to me and said, you know, why don't you try and write a poem? And there just happens to be this contest in Newsday they're starting up about garden poetry. So write a poem and try that. So I did, and the first poem I wrote wound up winning the Newsday 2011 Garden Poetry Contest. So the poet, the monster poet, was born. And I've been following poetry and prose, both, down the secondary career path.
What was the first thing that you actually got published in either a newspaper or a periodical?
First thing I ever got published in a newspaper or periodical was a poem I did for Great South Bay magazine to prove, well, actually, no, the contest winner did. That was just on a lark, and it wound up, you know, winning. So that was first. But to actually try to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe that was a fluke. Let me try and get something else published. Mm-hmm. Great South Bay magazine is very kind to poets on Long Island. So I said, okay, you have to give them what they want. So let me write a poem about life on the South Shore of Long Island, specifically for their target audience. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a poem called South Shore Summer Sonata. And that poem was published in Great South Bay. So I thought, okay, so apparently I can do this. So let me go forward.
So how did you feel when you first published a poem? When you first published any work?
The first time you get published, it's kind of like, wow. You know, it's you stand up and notice yourself. It really, the second thrill that comes is when I'm walking out of Home Depot and somebody recognizes me as that poet guy. And I guess with 4 million people on Long Island, somewhere somebody's going to recognize you and walk up to you. And it's like, wow, you know, the chest goes out a little bit. You're like, hey, that's pretty good. Now I'm among the rich and famous. Well, not the rich, but... and one person recognizes you coming out of Home Depot. You know, that's about as famous as you get with it.
Face recognition is I get, you look familiar. I know you're from somewhere, and I don't give them any cues, but because of this program and also, you know, appearances that you make, you end up doing a lot of appearances. And also, I meet you everywhere. Every time you join my meetup, I have a meetup group for just authors, not any particular genre, and then I see you at poetry circles. I was invited to one just to speak, just because the person who runs it is a friend of mine, because I don't write poetry. It's a great mystery to me, writing a poem. Which do you like better, the poetry or the prose?
Which do I like better? Wow, I find poetry easier. Poetry is more natural for me. when you're writing prose, when you're constructing a story and staying with a storyline for a long period of time, it's very difficult. It is putting a book or even a novella such as When the Ripper Calls together, it takes a lot more work than the poetry does. There's a lot of work in the poetry. You have to put it together and you have to do the editing and the marketing. It's all still there. But to write the story, the road to the finished product is easily a year, even with something in novella length. It's easily a year.
For a book, for prose.
For a book,
yes,
yeah, for a book
I
in
know.
prose, yeah.
Trust me, I know that. So, like, poetry is more like a stream of consciousness that
Yes,
you put down and
in the
then you
moment.
edit?
While I was waiting here today, to get called in to do the show, I sat down and I wrote a poem. I just,
Yeah, see, that's
yeah,
great.
it struck, and I sat down and I wrote 3 stanzas that I'll rework, and maybe it'll become 4, and maybe it'll go on the garbage pile, but you know.
Yeah. And there's
When
a lot of poetry opportunities or opportunities for poets here on Long Island.
On Long Island, yeah. We are kind of a hub here on Long Island, Long Island, New York City, the 5 boroughs of the city and the 2 counties of Long Island. Yeah, it's pretty much a poetry hub. There are many poets in this area.
What is Bard?
Bards is the Bards Initiative. It was started by a group of poets who wanted to push poetry, especially in the schools, to get them to start teaching people about poetry. And they're active in the libraries, and there is Local Gems Press, which has become a publisher for this great wealth of poets on Long Island. In fact, they're the ones who ran the National Poetry Month Writing Contest that April 1861 won in 2014. So they want to foster poetry all up and down the East Coast. That is the Bards Initiative.
And Bard meaning a word for?
Bard is the word for Shakespeare, the great bard.
The immortal bard.
The great bard, yes.
Yeah.
And he's...
He did okay.
He did all right. He did okay for himself,
Even
yeah.
in his own lifetime, which is unusual.
He's doing very well now because publishers love to publish his work because they don't have to pay him royalties. So you see a lot of Dead Poet Society people getting published. Those of us who are alive, well, we have to wait for about 100 years after we're dead and come back in spirit and appreciate it, I guess.
Now, there's a real disconnect between When the Ripper Calls
Yes.
in April 1861.
Yes.
Would you like to give us the background of When the Ripper Calls?
When the Ripper Calls, I was writing for a writing prompt, and my wife read it, and she said, all your stories end with that same trick ending. You know, you should write something different. Okay. So I wrote something completely different, and she said, fine, this is good, after she read that completely different one. And she says, now connect the 2 of them in a story. So one of those stories became chapter 1. One of those stories became the last chapter of the book, and I had fun writing the connection between them. And I followed the path of self-publishing it because I wanted a way, it came out first. It came out before the National Poetry Contest came out. And I wanted to learn the ropes. So I wanted to say, okay, what is this putting a book out all about? What's involved? What are all the nuances? What's the learning curve? I've never done this before. So I said, let me self-publish one. Let me put out an ebook. So When the Ripper Calls is currently only an ebook. And it taught me that there's a lot of work in it. The only thing putting the ebook out versus going with the traditional publisher is the delay. Publishers want to look at every little thing about the book, and they want to make sure that it meets their standards. They want to make sure that it's editorially acceptable to them as a corporation. They have what they have for resources, but you now are in a delay loop of waiting for the printer to come out with a proof, okaying the proof. You basically get sick of reading your own book for the 20th or 30th time when you're going through the traditional publisher, such as April 1861. And the ebook, all of that falls on you. So it'll get published, it'll get out to the public, depending upon how much work you're willing to do on it.
Well, I think many people who are interested in getting published, who may have a book or an idea for a book, I think they don't understand how many routes there are, how many pathways there are to getting published. This, I think, was a very clever idea on your part. When I think about this story, I think that was really clever. That has to be your engineering mind at work, because it doesn't cost anything to do it this way.
Well, here's where it cost me.
Okay.
It's your first foray into what could be a new career. You don't want to look stupid.
So you paid in.
So I paid an editor, a proofreader actually. There were a group of people who were Pulitzer Prize winning editors. And they have kind of a billionaires boys club, I guess. And the way they pay for their jollies, their club dues, is they do editing for people. They do proofreading for people for a fee.
Oh, sure.
So I says, well, if I'm going to pay for proofreading, because although what you get in your word processor is okay, it isn't perfect. So you're going to have to get an editor. And I figured I wanted the best. So I paid for them to edit the book so I wouldn't look stupid. Because if you make mistakes in your book, the general public is going to let you know it right away. So yeah, we went back and forth a few times. It wasn't, perfect on the first cut. We had to go back and forth a few times with the editing staff. And we came out with a book I was proud to put my name on.
Yes. So if, let's say, and I'm just saying this for the purpose of getting this out to the public, because this show really is watched by people who are interested in getting into it. Sure. You can pretty much get an ebook out there for nothing, as long as you don't pay an editor, as long as you don't have to pay an illustrator. You use a stock photograph.
Another thing, let's look at the cover here. That is a kitchen knife, a steak knife my wife did not like. That is the empty bag from the booze that I did like. And that is my nephew's doormat and my goddaughter, my niece, who took the picture. And then I went into Photoshop and I threw the titles on in white and the name on in white, and bingo, title. The thing about the title, now I used Kindle Direct Publishing for mine on Amazon. And there's a lot of confusion about book covers. One, start working your book cover when you're in the final stages of edit, because it can be a long delay. Oh, I have a friend who's a graphic artist and this and that. That becomes 3 months. Then it becomes they can't do it right now and you want to publish. So work on your book cover right away. Get it moving. I wound up, the goddaughter's camera taking a picture on my nephew's front doorstep. At a family party.
So this is just for an ebook. Then you can move to another step of self-publishing, which is going to a company like iUniverse. I used Archway the last time. Lulu, there are so many. Now, almost every traditional publisher has a subdivision that's self-publishing. When you do that, of course, then you have packages that you look at, and they give you all the services because they urge you, again, to produce something that's industry standard. And I was very happy with that because I had never written a book. With my first book, I had no idea what to look for, and they helped me through that process, and I really felt that the book that was produced was good. Then you go one step up again, and it's small press. Small press is sort of a traditional publisher, but it's small press, and then you move up the line. It depends on, if I were 25 when I started this, I would have gone traditional, but I wasn't, and I did this as something that I thought this is going to be great fun, and I didn't mind the hard work, although sometimes I get pretty sick of it, but I didn't want to wait. it was the weight factor that you just mentioned that.
Yeah, the weight factor is a big thing, and when you decide to self-publish, like you were talking about, there are many different levels you can go to. You can go from bare bones, just do it on your own, then you can selectively pick out the pieces of the puzzle, such as I picked out, I wanted it professionally edited to make sure it was up to a standard where I wouldn't embarrass myself. There's a lot of embarrassing stuff out there that people flood the market with.
But the market is the great leveler.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the great
But you can then step up, and decide how much you want to pay. You can go from nothing to thousands that people pay.
And I think you hit the nail on the head with the most important thing that you need to get professionally done is editing, yes?
Yeah, I think so. And even once you've written a book, you have to learn, even with the professional editors, you have to learn what to accept and what to reject. Now, I had a point in this book, in When the River Calls, that they didn't want to capitalize heaven and hell, column note, because these aren't real places.
Yeah.
In my book, they're very real places, comment rejected. So you're the money that's paying them.
Well, this
You
is,
will accept or reject what they want to edit. Now, a lot of people write a book and say, oh, this is my baby. This is, oh, it's so perfect. I crafted every word of every sentence. It's pure gold. No, you have to take the attitude of, you have to poke the baby in the eyes to get it published. Poke it, get it published. But then temper that with, if you see something that is crucial, reject the editor's comment, period. Go for the publisher.
true. Now, I would like to move on to April 1861 because I think that this is such an unusual book and such an interesting book, and I'd like you to tell our viewers how you crafted this book, and then perhaps you'll do a reading for us.
Sure. April 1861, we had to write 30 poems in 30 days. That was the challenge for the National Poetry Month contest. And it all had to be on a related subject. So what I chose, I was sitting in my home, in my library, and I saw some books, the chronology of the Civil War. I said, well, April of 1861 was the month it started, so let me write a poem and start it with just a blurb. Let me start each day with a blurb of a historical fact that happened on that day, and then write a poem about it as if I was directly involved in the event or directly affected by the event. And I was able to do that for 30 days, and that was challenging. And I think it turned out pretty well. Well, so did the publisher. It was a prize winner. It was second place it won in 2014.
But that's got to be one terrific challenge to have to write a poem for every day of April.
It is a tremendous challenge just to get it written. There were days you didn't do any. There were days you did 2 or 3, and my wife loved that because she got to see me for the weekend because I wrote 3 on Friday.
Now, did they have parameters? Did they say they had to be related?
Has to be related to a particular subject. It has to be, nothing over 100 lines each. Excuse me. And it, no obscenity or anything like that, of course. And it's just very challenging to do it, to keep your mind wrapped around it. But you'll find that once you're in the groove, you can pop out 3, 4, or 5 poems and then kick back and relax and go to dinner with friends some night instead of sitting at the computer trying to say, I need to write a poem about a horse and buggy and what am I going to do?
And why did you pick the Civil War?
I'm a history buff, general history buff, not so much on the Civil War, but some. I have a number of books in my library on the Civil War, so they were there and they jumped off the shelf at me when I was looking for
Especially
the idea.
April, I suppose.
And also April, April 1861, and it was the month of April. April is National Poetry Month, and that is...
And it was the month that the Civil War started.
Exactly, yeah, and I followed this with something that's in the final phases pre-production,
was
which
gonna
is
ask you
April
about that.
1865.
Yeah.
April 1865 is also going to be published by the same publisher. They liked the first one. I put in another one, and they said, yeah, we'll publish that too. You know.
When is that going to be out?
I expect that to be out the end of the year.
Oh, good, because I have a number of people on my Christmas list that I will like to get both books for.
This is good. I hope you have a very large Christmas list. And when I read something, you give people an idea of, you have a fact of history, and then you follow that up with a poem. And here's my favorite from April 1861. April 21st, April 1861. Baltimore riots. Harper's Ferry in Norfolk, Virginia have been taken over by the Virginia militia. Troops promised by the northern states have not arrived. Washington, D.C. is isolated and vulnerable. President Lincoln prays in his darkest hour. Dear Lord, I come to thee with bowed head and troubled heart, for armies promised have not arrived, and my spirit is sorely afflicted by those who will not spurn the galling yoke of slavery. You have set me on this righteous path and to freedom, and yet all around me is darkness. The darkness of men's souls who will not see the light, the darkness of their hearts that will not do what's right, the darkness of the hillside with no defenders' campfires burning in the night. And still with all this, Lord, I shall walk by faith and not by sight. I now retire to my chamber. I ask for a restful sleep. I ask you for the fortitude, one nation under God, for me to keep. I ask most of all for a single candle to guide my footsteps through this madness, to heal this nation if it's not too late, to shield us from the sadness. Bring the light of your love to every living soul, for as I pray, all around me is darkness. Amen.
That's from Lincoln, yes. Yeah.
Oh, President Lincoln. He also had to write some letters, some communiques to politicians to try and keep the Union together. And as late as April 24th, a full week and a half after the attack on Fort Sumter, the state of Maryland hadn't even voted as to whether or not Maryland was going to stay in the...
He wasn't going to let Maryland. Too close.
Well, he didn't have much choice. You know, those troops didn't get down to Washington because they had to get off the train north of Baltimore, because in Baltimore they were shooting at the troop trains and stopping the troop trains from